church. Hope you're all doing well. When I was 16 years old, I went on my first missions trip to Thailand with my mum to work with the Burmese refugees and the kids that had been rescued from trafficking. Now, I still remember this trip so clearly because for me, it was a life-changing trip. I remember so many different things, but things like I remember heading down to the hill tribe villages, and I was sitting with these girls in their bamboo huts, and they casually told me about some of the horrors that they endured, and it's stuck with me ever since. I remember seeing kids as young as 6 with their siblings on their hips, walking for miles and miles down to the water wells whilst their parents literally worked all day on the fields for as little as £1, which was just enough to feed the family that day. I remember chasing and tickling the kids outside the hostel and their infectious laugh. And I also remember walking them in the mornings to their school lessons. You know, it's funny because for me, school was something I hated and I dreaded. But for these little kids, school was literally a miracle, something they loved, they looked forward to, and they were so grateful for. I loved that trip to Thailand, so much so that the following year when I got the opportunity, I went again, and then again, and again. I loved it. I loved working with these children, and I loved how it made me feel. You see, it was definitely when I felt my strongest and my best. Some of you might know my testimony, some of you might not. You see, in my teenage years, I struggled a lot with fear and anxiety, especially around my friendships and my relationships. But what I found, church, is that when I just got lost in helping other people, like I did in these trips to Thailand and when I was helping my mum in the soup kitchen on a Sunday or at the local church, when I just got lost in helping and serving other people, everything seemed to disappear. And I felt inner peace and joy. So when I hit 18, I finished college, I had no idea what I wanted to do. All I knew is that I wanted to help people. And the first opportunity that presented itself was a role at the YMCA as a support worker working with young homeless people. And I remember seeing this job and I desperately wanted it. Well, by God's grace, I got the job. And I say it's by God's grace because I had none of the qualifications, I had none of the experience, I had none of the skills. In fact, I can still remember the phone conversation with the lady that interviewed me. She rang me and she started with, "You were the least qualified candidate that we saw today." And I thought, okay, I hope this gets better, and it did. But there's 2 things that she said to me on that telephone call that have stuck with me forever. The first thing she said to me was that I was by far the candidate that had done the most volunteer work. She said, well, you were the youngest person that we saw that day for that position, but you had done the most volunteer work, and all the interviewers said they loved that about you. And the second thing that she said was that I was by far the most passionate candidate that they'd seen that day. You know, she was right. I was the least qualified for that role, but I was by far the most passionate. And over the next 6 years of working at the YMCA in various different roles, I loved those young people with everything in me. Now, my time at the YMCA was amazing for different reasons. Yes, because of the experience and the training I gained, but they were also the ones that paid for and enrolled me to do my BA Honours degree in Informal Education, Youth Community and Social Development. That's quite a tongue twister, isn't it, guys? I mean, that deserves a clap just for getting that out. But this qualification and this experience then enabled me to go on to work with young people in a different capacity, this time in prisons. I worked with young people in prison for gang-related offences, and my job was to, when they were exiting prison, to reintegrate them back into society away from the gang members. And I got to tell you, church, again, I loved my job. But I genuinely do believe that it was my passion and heart for the young people that got me further than any qualification could have got me and took me further and higher into different positions within the organisation than any training could have had. Fast forward to 2012. I am fortunate enough to go away with our senior pastor, Kathy Clark, to Hillsong Colour Conference in Kiev. Now, this was an amazing trip for so many different reasons. I'm coughing, not crying. I mean, it was good, but it wasn't that emotional. But one of the reasons was that God opened up a door for me beyond my wildest dreams. You see, whilst I was there, Christine Kane, the founder of charity A21, a global anti-trafficking organisation working with victims of human trafficking, she was sharing about some of the work that she did with victims of modern slavery. And I remember sitting there thinking, wow, I would love to work for an organisation like that. Well, God's got a funny sense of humor, church, because literally 1 month later, I was doing just that. I got hired on A21 to start the A21 UK office. That's our first ever office in the UK. So I've been with the charity now for 7.5 years, and now I stand here today as the European Regional Manager, overseeing our European operational offices. Now, I got that role, the promotion into the European role, I got that last year, 6 months after having my son Knox. And I share that with you because I'm just going to, I know he's dead cute, isn't he? Like, I don't think I'm even biased. I think he's like the cutest little thing in the world. But I tell you that I had it 6 months, I got that job after 6 months after having the baby, because I'm just going to be real and a bit vulnerable with you for a moment. But I was so scared about having a family. I was so terrified about having a baby. Because in my mind, for some reason, I thought selfishly that having a baby would mean I couldn't have a career. I thought that having a baby would stop me from being able to do what I loved. It would stop me from being able to help the people I wanted to help. I genuinely thought that having a baby would mean that work would take some responsibilities off me. In my head, it was either or. But how good is our God? That he would never allow something especially so precious to ever stop me from doing what I love. He would never allow something to pull me away from what I'm called to do. In fact, he would equip me and empower me to do both. He would elevate me into a position and grace and strengthen me into something even bigger and better than I could ever have imagined. And what I realized very quickly in that period is that God's grace is so sufficient for every season, that he will always make a way, and that he loves the people that I work with even more than I do. So I've been in the charity sector 13 years now, and if you're in the charity sector, you'll be able to identify with what I'm about to say. But I often get asked questions like things like, isn't your job really emotionally draining? Don't you feel like you're just gonna burn out sometimes? Isn't the scale of the problem just actually too overwhelming? Don't you find yourself just getting down occasionally because of the nature of the issue? And to be honest, church, the answer to all those questions is yes. And that's why the reality is that so many people in the sector do either drop out or burn out, because the answer to those questions is yes. Sometimes I do find myself getting emotionally overwhelmed. I do get down. It is draining. But you know what, church? I know that I am called to this type of work. And all throughout the Bible, Jesus instructs us to do justice, love kindness, and walk humbly. And so it's by his grace and his strength that I'm able to do this day in, day out. Yes, the statistics, they are overwhelming. 45 million people trapped in slavery today. That's the statistic that I deal with on a daily basis. The odds do seem to be against us. But I genuinely do believe that we can make a difference. In fact, I genuinely believe that I can make a difference. That as Folu talked about, that I am marked for such a time as this to do this type of work. And because of that, I genuinely believe that God did mark me all those years ago when I was a little girl, that he gave me a passion and a heart for people that is so needed in this sector. Because I'm not going to pull back, I'm not going to retreat, I'm not going to withdraw, I'm not going to harden my heart to the issues around me. And I genuinely do believe that actually we can end injustices like human trafficking in my lifetime. And so I guess just to finish my little section here, I would say that in my sphere, my journey, what I've learned is that God has equipped me, he has enabled me, and he has graced me for such a time as this to do this type of work. And if I can just help one person find freedom, then that's good enough for me. Amen. Amen.